You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 29. Today I'll be talking to Stephanie Buer. So my name's Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. If this is your first time listening, Art Affairs is meant to give you a look at and into the new contemporary art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, shining a spotlight on the human side of the wonderful work they do. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes at artaffairs.podcast.com, and you can check out new episodes on all your favorite podcast platforms. Of course, if you like what I'm doing here, be sure to subscribe, and you can always connect with the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is artist Stephanie Buer. I first discovered Stephanie's work through her relationship with ThinkSpace. She's had several solo shows with the gallery, and also has participated in many of their group shows over the years. We talk about how she first got connected with Andrew and ThinkSpace on the show, as well as her love and passion for abandoned spaces, the MFA that she's currently focused on, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Stephanie Buer. Stephanie, welcome to the show. It's really good to have you on.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to meet you.
All right, awesome. So from what I understand, you grew up in the quote-unquote countryside of Western Michigan. So tell me what that means. Were you on like farmland, or is it pretty rural area?
It was pretty rural. I actually lived in, it's like a tiny little town. It was so tiny that they called it a village. And I don't know, maybe like only a couple hundred people. And my dad ran a well drilling business. It's like 5 generations. It's very old. And so he mostly drilled wells for farmers. So yeah, it was very rural.
Okay, so 5 generations, you're not drilling wells. So does that mean the generational business is over?
No, actually my little brother works
for
them. Yeah, I wasn't allowed to because I'm a girl.
Okay.
I came from one of those kind of families.
What kind of work did your mother do?
She doesn't do work. Yeah, she was just a mom.
That's work. I mean, that's
yeah, true. That's very hard work.
Did you spend a lot of time in nature at all?
Yes, I did. Yeah, we had my great-grandpa, during the Depression, I think, he bought old sheep herding land in northern Michigan. It was like 1,000 acres. And so we had a little tiny cabin up there that we would go to. Okay.
So you living in a fairly remote area, at least growing up. Mm-hmm. Your parents didn't really do anything art related.
No.
How did you first take an interest in art then? Was there much exposure to it outside of your family?
We always drew growing up. So like my sister and I, we had this like huge roll of butcher paper that someone gifted us, and so we would like unroll it on the floor and we would just draw for hours. And then at some point, I just thought to myself that I'm pretty good at this. And then our high school was really small. We didn't have a good art program, but I would sit and paint in my like last few years of high school. Just kind of taught myself. And then went to, I wanted to be an artist. Probably like at the end of high school, I decided I wanted to be an artist, but my art teacher told me I was too detail-oriented, that I would never make it. Maybe I could be an art restorer. So then I went to community college for that. So I kind of like found my own way to it. No, there was no, I think I'm probably the first in my family to get a degree. Like it was just like a very rural, conservative, hardworking family, but they didn't introduce me to art.
So, I mean, and before you took that path towards art, from what I understand, you were like super into ballet, and you at one point wanted to be like a professional ballet dancer. Went to school for it. So, like, was that something you were like super active in growing up?
Yep. I started dancing when I was 7, but it was, imagine like a small town, one of those little dance studios where you do tap dancing and stuff. Very tiny. I started there, but I was very fortunate that there was a couple teachers there who had been really into ballet, and so I learned from them. And then when I got a little older and my family maybe was a little more established, because we were really poor growing up, they were able to pay for me to go to ballet classes in Grand Rapids, which was the closest town.
So what happened to that? You're not a professional ballet dancer now. Why did you diverge from that, I guess?
Well, when I was in high school, that was mostly when I started training at the ballet school. And so it was kind of late, or at least I told myself it was kind of late. In hindsight, I probably could have pursued it. But when you're young and you have adults telling you like, oh, you're too, there was a lot of body like issues, like you're too big, you're too old, you're never going to make it. And so you believe those adults, but you really should have just shut out all the noise and done whatever you wanted, which ended up being my takeaway from ballet school. But so I trained really hard in high school, and then halfway through my senior year, I quit because I realized I was better at art, which that choice financially doesn't make any sense. Ballet or art. You'd think I would have been like, I need to pick something that makes money, but no. So I started working more to save up money to go to college halfway through my senior year and quit ballet. But when I ended up going to school, I just loved it so much I kept taking classes. And so I continued to train and perform until 2010.
Oh, okay.
I just loved it so much. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And so you kind of took a little interesting detour to art restoration. You mentioned took community classes or community college classes for art restoration.
Yeah.
Why did you start there? I guess why that stopgap instead of just going straight into art?
Probably because my like I said, I was a very easily influenced youngster. And so when my art teacher at the high school told me that I could never make it as an artist, I believed her. And so, because you grow up thinking adults know what they're talking about. And so, I enrolled I had to go to community college first because I was pretty poor and paying my own way. So I started taking classes for that there. But the chemistry was so hard and so boring and tedious. And I happened to have this really, really lovely studio art teacher in community college, which I think there's just gems everywhere. And he was amazing. His name was Nick Antonakis, and he taught me how to draw and paint. And he told me that I could do this if I wanted to. And so he trained me a bit and helped me build up a portfolio. So that was when I changed my mind.
Awesome. And so you ended up going to Detroit, College for Creative Studies in Detroit. Why Detroit and why that school in particular?
I think it probably was had a lot to do with that. If I stayed in state, it was cheaper than going to like a private art school in another state. Or actually, it probably had more to do with that. I was scared to move too far from my family because we were all really close. So it's like 2.5 hours away as opposed to like going to some school really far away.
Had you spent much time in Detroit before going to school there?
No, I'd never been to Detroit.
Okay.
Nope.
What was your focus in school?
I went there because I wanted to paint and draw. And I remember my first semester, there was a sculpture class I had to take because I had to like make up for some of the classes I couldn't get at community college, and that one of the main ones was sculpture, and I was absolutely terrified of it. Just the thought of working in 3D was so scary, but I ended up loving it, and so I majored mostly in stone carving.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And for what I understand, that's also the time period where you really fell in love with not only the city of Detroit, but also just urban exploring in general.
Yeah.
So how did that first start? Like, how did you first discover this love of urban exploration?
I had some landscape. Well, no, let's see. I spent, what the Heidelberg Project is in Detroit?
I've heard of it. The name sounds familiar, but I couldn't tell you what it is.
It's the artist who started it. His name is Tyree Guyton, and he had a bunch of. Detroit was very empty, very run down. A lot of abandoned houses from the riots, and so he kind of like bought up a bunch of these old houses and turned them into art installation projects to like help the community and bring people together. And I had a friend in school, and we used to go down there and hang out all the time. There was another artist who lived there in like this little yellow house. I can't remember his name, but we would go hang out there, and we were helping them with an art installation. And there's this old abandoned automobile factory in Detroit called the Packard plant that like went out of business just after the war, World War II. And it had been used for like various other purposes. And one of them for a short time it was like a holding zone, a storage area for like a thrift. What's the thrift store? Salvation Army. And so there was just rooms somewhere in that building that were filled with donations. And the guys knew about this, and they wanted to go there and explore it and like get materials for installations. What were they looking for? They were looking for, I think, ice skates. Or roller skates or something really random. And so they took me to the Packard plant. That was my first time in one of these like massive old abandoned buildings. And being from the countryside where you could spend a lot of time in the woods, and moving to Detroit that was very noisy and busy, there was something about walking into that space. It was so quiet and peaceful, and it was big and beautiful, and it just kind of felt like being in the middle of nowhere again.
That's interesting that the sort of remnants of industry took you back to the experience, the feeling and kind of the spirit of just walking through the woods that you had as a kid. Yeah.
And we did find that room with all of the like supplies, and there were these big boxes that were like, I mean, I'm showing you with my hands, but you can't see, but they were huge, and they were all filled with like, one would have belts, the other would have ice skates. And at one, there was like this mountain that was twice as tall as me, and it was all pumps, like, 80s lady office shoes or whatever. And you could literally like climb this pile of pumps.
Oh, wow.
I remember. It was just so bizarre, but I had so much fun, and it was sad but beautiful, but yeah, very much like nature. And I would go back there all the time, and as the seasons changed, it was really interesting because you could I remember going there in say like March on a warm day when you could tell spring was coming in the Midwest. And you ever been in the woods when like things are thawing out and you can hear the dripping in the trees, and you can just like hear all that frozen water melting, which means that things are going to start growing again. And you could hear that there. And,
interesting.
It was very beautiful. And you would go out, and it was 4 stories high, and you could go out onto the roof. And the roof was like a grassland. There was trees everywhere. Oh, so wow. Yeah, that was how I fell in love with those buildings, those landscapes. Everything was so interesting.
And your interest in it initially, was it always with the intent of using it for your art, like as a subject, or did you just go out because you genuinely enjoyed exploring those places first?
I just went out because I generally enjoyed it. It kind of like fulfilled this need to be outside and to be away from people and explore.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, cool. And so you ended up graduating in 2006 with a BFA. Do you feel that your time in school there was valuable? Like, do you feel that it helped you grow in the ways that you needed?
Yeah, I had a really good drawing instructor. That was actually when those images made their way into my work. It was just drawing and just landscapes. And so I was going to like parks in the city and drawing scenes there, but then like I was kind of bored. I was like, everybody's doing these, everybody knows what a beautiful landscape is. And so that's when I started rifling through all these photos I took and painted scenes from the Packard plant. But yeah, there were definitely moments in art school where you get that, like, if I do a realistic drawing, they're like, what are you doing? This is boring. This is old. Nobody's painting anymore. Nobody's drawing anymore, especially representationally. So I got a lot of that, which you still have to work through, Had you gotten better at filtering some of that stuff out? Because you said earlier that was a problem, you listen to adults too much. Had you gotten better at not paying attention to that as much? Yeah, I'm really good at it now. To an extent, things still bother you. But yeah, I think I had like at that point, I was like, I already gave up a ballet career. I already did this, all these things because people told me I was, I couldn't do it. I remember at one point when I was in school, I was maybe 16 and I didn't have my full splits yet. And this teacher was like, well, if you don't have them now, you'll never have them. And that's kind of like when these things started kicking in. I was like, well, whatever, I'm going to do it. And I can still do it, So yeah, I got pretty good at it. I got a lot of very, that conceptual art school feedback where everyone was doing, installations and, stuff with technology, and nobody was painting anymore. And I was like, no, I'm just going to do it and I'm not going to listen to you. And I did it. And there was probably 2 teachers who were very supportive, but the rest, it was like, I was like fighting through maple syrup to get to the other side.
Right on. Well, I mean, it's good that you were able to kind of silence some of those voices. After graduating, though, you ended up staying in Detroit, and I think all in all, you spent about 10 years there. What kind of work did you do right after graduation?
I didn't really work. I was dancing a lot then, and my second year at CCS, I got invited to do an internship in the summer at General Motors, sculpting cars, because I had done a lot of sculpting in my undergrad. And so then they offered me a job, which it was like a lot of money for an art school student. And I knew I had student debt because I had paid my own way. And so I wanted to get rid of that before I launched off into a full-time art career, which was my end goal. So I worked at GM for like 5 years sculpting cars for the Cadillac studio.
Interesting. So was that like a regular like office job where you can go there, 9 to 5 or whatever, normal office work is?
Yep, but it was in a big studio. We were sculpting cars out of clay. So I was never sitting at a desk with a computer. We were like we were sculpting like 3/4 to full-size Cadillacs every day.
So what were those sculptures ultimately used for? Were they for design purposes?
It was for design purposes. Like, a very basic explanation is a designer draws a 2D sketch and then you take the sketch and build it in 3D so that they can fix it, tweak it, make sure it looks okay and works. And then eventually it would go to engineering and on until it became a car.
So how did you like the corporate environment?
No, I didn't like it. The people were really nice because you were mostly working in that environment. You were mostly working with other artists. So it was, I liked the people. I liked working with my hands, but it wasn't something that I wanted to do forever. And people were always telling me, you get here, the money is so good, the benefits are so good. They call them the golden handcuffs. They're like, you'll never be able to leave. You'll love it. So I'd kind of always squirreled that away in the back of my mind. I was like, I'm leaving someday.
I'll show you.
I saved all the money I made. I was kind of,
Right on. That's cool. Were you still able to make time for your own personal work at the same time while you were working at GM?
There was a stretch of time where I didn't, because while I was working at GM, I was dancing and performing full time. Because it was just like, I knew I was going to get older, and ballet is very hard on your body. So I was like making a few drawings here and there, but I was like, for right now, I'm going to allow myself to save money and like dance as much as I can before I get too old. So it was just for fun at that point, and it was a lot of fun.
So at what point did you pick that back up and start refocusing on your personal work?
Well, I was probably like in 2010, I got married. I'm not married anymore, but I married someone that I met in art school, and we both worked at GM. And in 2008, GM went bankrupt, and a lot of the young people that were hired started getting laid off. And we were still there, but there was like this fear that out of college, we only knew cars, or like my ex only knew cars, and he wanted to diversify his portfolio. And I had made a friend in one of the internships who ended up working out at Nike in Portland. And so he got my ex a job designing shoes. And so it was like 5 years at GM at that point, and I had saved up enough that I could do art full time. So we moved out to Portland, Oregon, and I just started making a ton of work.
Okay, so it was the move out to Portland that sort of acted as a catalyst for you to refocus.
Yeah.
Interesting. Have you enjoyed living in the Pacific Northwest?
Oh my God, I love it. Yeah, I do. I miss Detroit, but it's also at the time that I left in 2011, because I stayed on and worked a little bit longer to make sure that my ex liked his job and everything. So, yeah, Detroit was starting to change a lot. And so I miss it, but I think I miss the Detroit I used to like.
Oh, okay.
That sounds very selfish because it was very depressed. But yeah, but I really like Portland. I love it. It kind of feeds my need. When I lived in Detroit, I was backpacking a lot in the mountains, and I would travel to like Wyoming or Washington and go on backpacking trips. And so once I got to the Northwest, I could really focus on learning to mountaineer and stuff and spend time in the mountains.
Yeah, I hear you're into like rock climbing. Is that looks like
Yeah.
So
Yep.
when did that interest first take place? Was that when you moved to Portland, or was it even before?
No, I didn't rock climb before. When I was in high school, I had taken like this, it was like a mountaineering trip to Colorado. It was my senior year of high school. It was amazing. I loved it. And I had never stopped dreaming about mountains since. And so when I got out here, I remember like first coming to Oregon and going to visit Mount Rainier, in Washington. And I just couldn't believe how amazing that mountain was. And I was talking to one of the rangers. And I was like, do people climb this? And he told me there was like this mountaineering club in Portland, Oregon I could take classes with. So yeah, I just started taking classes, and I've been doing it maybe for I've been more serious mountaineering and rock climbing for like 6 years, maybe 7, 8. I don't know. Yeah.
Do you think you'll end up staying there in Portland? Like, is that home now?
Well, I'm actually, I love the Northwest. I don't know if Portland will be home. I'm actually trying to make my way up to Vancouver, BC at the moment. I started my MFA, and just waiting. I just got my visa. Everything's been delayed because of COVID, of course.
Sure,
and
yeah.
so I just got my visa, and so I'll probably be in Vancouver, BC for the spring semester and then all of next year.
Okay, interesting. So,
yeah.
You mentioned 2010 being a change of direction for you, lifestyle wise, and that's also when you first started getting your work into galleries. I noticed that as part of your CV, that's when you start getting work into group shows. So, I guess how did you first start getting noticed by galleries and building those relationships?
Well, I got really, really lucky when I moved out in like March of 2011. I just kind of hit the studio and was like, if I don't have a body of work, I'm not going to be able to get anywhere. So that was my main focus. And then I do not remember how I met this guy, but I think I was just going out, and there was this coffee shop in Southeast Portland that this artist, I didn't know him at the time, but his name was Joe Shea. And he had him and his wife owned a coffee shop, and they had little gallery showings. And I went to some of them and met him. And at the last minute, he had a cancellation, and he had seen my work. And so he just invited me last minute to put some work up. And Joe Shea actually knew Andrew Hausner at ThinkSpace. And so he was like, you gotta see this work. I really like it. And then Andrew really liked it. And he ended up bringing some of my work to, what was that show they used to do? It was called Beyond Eden, I think.
Yeah.
At Barnsdale Park in LA, maybe. So I sent some work out there that October. So it was maybe like 6 months after. No, I think I had some work in the coffee shop in August. So by October, some of it was down in LA. And Andrew really liked it. And then the following April in 2012, I had my first solo there.
Very cool. And that was the show Nothing Lasts Forever, I guess.
I think so, where it had Morgan Spurlock had that show in the main room. Yeah, that was my intro.
And that's obviously been a really strong relationship that you've developed with Andrew and with ThinkSpace over the years.
Yeah.
You've done several solo shows with them since. Do you like having a strong relationship with the gallery in that way? Do you think that's an important aspect of your career? For me, yeah, I would.
Especially because my work isn't like super popular. It doesn't really like grab people right away like some of the more, I don't know. Some people get really, really popular really fast, and mine is kind of more of a slow burn, I think. And so to have the continued support of a gallery, especially a gallery like ThinkSpace, I don't think I would have a career without it.
Well, it's definitely seems to be a lot of good energy there. Do you have, I mean, every 2 years or so, it seemed like you were doing a show, which would mean
Yep.
Potentially something in a year now. So, like, do you have anything coming up with them?
I don't. We haven't really talked about it because I'm doing my MFA right now. So I might just not do a solo at the moment. But I have stuff in group shows with them, like probably every other month. So I'm not really sure. They just moved into a new space too. And so I think he's kind of probably planning things out, but I haven't put anything on the calendar. I don't know if it would be wise. I mean, I know like an MFA is kind of like oh God, am I shooting myself in the foot with this, with my career wise? But it's just something I've always wanted to do. And I think that everybody understands that. So hopefully, yeah, I'll have another one someday soon.
So yeah, I mean, I did want to talk to you about your MFA, so we can shift into that real quick, because I'm curious to know more about that decision. And I noticed it on your CV. You had it listed as 2022.
Mm-hmm.
So I was curious, does that mean you're completing it by 2022, or is that when? It doesn't sound like that's when you're starting it, because it sounds like you've already started it.
Yeah, that's when I'm completing it.
Okay, and I guess what went into the decision to get that? Like, what was going through your head? Was it, do you think it's necessary, or do you think it was just something you wanted to challenge yourself with?
I've always kind of wanted one ever since I graduated, but I had the little art school burnout, and also just needed to kind of like, after so much negative feedback, I kind of needed to prove to myself that there was space for this, So I took 10 years off. But also, I'll be perfectly honest with you. Like, it's really hard to make a living selling art. I've been doing it full time for 10 years with nothing on the side, just this. And I have a lot of friends who also teach to kind of subsidize their income. Is that the right word? I don't know. But I had some nice, long, lovely chats with like Mary Iverson and some other artists who are like, this is totally worth it, So I kind of want to teach. I would like to have the option to be able to teach, and you can't do that without an MFA.
Oh, okay, so that this may be one way to kind of enter the teaching field or add teaching to your repertoire, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah. I know that's not like the most exciting explanation, but I would love to teach someday. It sounds really fun and rewarding, and it's also a good way to get like healthcare.
Well, yeah.
If it works out.
It's unfortunate that is a driving force in a lot of people's decisions, right. But yes, that's a reality, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's so hard to make a living. I know it's not a popular opinion. Some people, they get really popular and they do really well, but I think for the majority of artists, it's very hard to make a living.
And that's in Canada. So you said you're going to move up there for a while, at least while you're working on it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Have you been to Canada before?
I mean, I grew up in Michigan, and so it was kind of like, we were there all the time, fishing and camping, and I have some wild stories of going to Windsor to pick up Ukrainian folk dancers for ballets, and I have some crazy stories.
Interesting.
I've been there, but not to BC. No, I visited the school. I did like a school visits at RISD and Emily Carr, and so I went up to see the school and chat with people, but that's it. And then we got locked out.
What went into the decision for that school in particular? Like, why did you land on that one?
Well, I picked like 4 schools to apply to. One was in Chicago and one was in Seattle. And I only got into RISD and Emily Carr. And, in Canada, the government subsidizes public, like college education, even private art schools. So it's very affordable. I think the tuition is something like, I can't remember, but the other option was RISD, which is like $53,000 a year, which like, I don't know if anybody knows what it's like to be an artist, but there's no way I can make a living as an artist with that much school debt. It's just ridiculous. Sure. Yeah.
No, I definitely understand that. I would be, honestly be tempted to stay in Canada after. I have to be honest, but you think after you complete school, do you think you'll end up back in Portland, or are you going to go to Detroit? Are you going to stay in Canada? Like, have you thought about that?
I don't know. You automatically get a 3-year working visa if you graduate from a Canadian school. So that's cool. I don't know if I'll use it, but it will be nice to have. And everybody there is so lovely, you know? It just seems so magical. But I don't think I would move back to Detroit, to be honest, after living in the mountains. And it's so beautiful out west. I don't know if I could do it. My family's there, though, and we're all still very close, so it's tempting. And my sister would, I think she secretly is hoping I'll move back. But I love the mountains. I love the landscape.
Right on. So let's dive into your work for a bit. And obviously a big focus, for you has been these abandoned spaces, which I find interesting. You know, I had, Faith 47 on a few episodes ago, and she's also has a huge fascination for abandoned spaces. And we talked a little bit about her attraction to them. And she sort of uses them as a substrate, though, sort of paints on them and likes them in those ways. Whereas you more or less use them as your subject and almost document them and capture them as the subject of your work. But I wonder if it's sort of the same fascination or attraction that draws both of you to abandoned spaces. So, like, what is your attraction to them in particular?
Well, it's definitely changed over the years. What brings me back to it, especially having to start. One of the things I've really enjoyed about going back to school is it really asks you why a lot. So you find yourself being like, why do I do this? And explaining yourself, which has been really, really helpful. But I think originally, like I said, I just liked it for, the peaceful space. It was very interesting and unique. And then after you do a couple drawings of it, I love nature and mountains and the imagery and whatever, but you make a painting of it and people are like, oh, that's cool. I love that. That's beautiful. But you make a painting of, say, like an old factory or a city view that most people would pass over. People look at it and they go, oh, I like that. That's beautiful. And then they're like, wait, what? That's really trashy. That's really ugly, or that's not something people would normally stop and look at. So that was early on, I had a real fascination with that. How do you get people to question their notions of a beautiful landscape? And there was also something kind of cool about the way that nature would take over. I don't like painting people. I just have never been into it, never been attracted to it. And so I sometimes like to imagine that there's no people in the world. I kind of would subtract if there was moving cars or signs of, actual life, human life. I would take it out because I like to imagine how, the world would be so happy if everyone was finally gone, breathe this big sigh of relief and be like, oh, okay. I was thinking about it the other week about, you ever have a big party at your house and it gets really messy and it gets really crazy and there's trash everywhere and cups, and everyone finally leaves the house and you close the door behind the last guest and you turn around and you breathe that big sigh of relief and you're like, all right. And I always start picking up the bottles and the recyclables and you slowly put your house back together. And so I would imagine that was what the earth would do. Oh God, they finally left.
What an interesting metaphor. I like it. That's really cool.
Oh my God.
And so you sort of hinted on this because I feel like a big aspect of your work is encouraging people to find the beauty in the, ordinary, so to speak. Kind of slowing down and recognizing the beauty in the everyday, which, is, I don't think, a very natural human tendency. I think, being very purposeful creatures like we are, everybody tends to zoom through life, hyper-focused on what's in front of them, not really paying attention to the world around. And I feel like your work more or less is a suggestion to slow down, admire all of the interesting things around us. So, I mean, is that a conscious theme that you're really trying to inject into this, or is it just something that sort of naturally flows out of your work?
Yeah, no, totally. And I'm glad you have that takeaway, because especially of late, I'm thinking about that. I've been doing a lot of, I know everybody's watched, say, the documentary, The Social Dilemma on Netflix. And I've been doing a lot of readings by authors who study technology and the internet and social media and the way that it's changing how our brains work, how, you study young people who have grown up with technology and the way that they interact with each other or don't interact with each other, and the way our days have just become so distracted and hectic and busy. And so if I can kind of like do the opposite of that, like force you to be in the moment, to be present, to be calm, to like look at things for longer than, I don't know, what's our attention span these days, like kind of instill that. Yeah, I really dislike social media, and I dislike the way that our brains are being rewired. And I wish that we could slow down more, So I really like to think about that, making very peaceful scenes, but also they're a little bit like not where you would expect. I feel like if you were like really purposefully you would paint a mountain, or a beach or something. But I like to kind of, because more often than not, when you wake up in the morning in any city, you're not gonna look at that beautiful lake or that beautiful mountain. You're gonna probably be in a city, and you might be looking at like a fire escape or, a dirty, a strip mall or something. So if you can teach people in some ways to like slow down in those moments and find beauty.
And I think that's what's unique about your work is I think people would naturally stop and admire the mountains, would naturally stop and admire the lake. They may not naturally admire the abandoned building that's across the street, right? So I feel like that encouragement is suggesting that, hey, you don't have to go anywhere besides your home and your town to really appreciate what's around you,
Yeah, because not everybody can go somewhere, That's a privilege to go on these fancy vacations or mountain retreats.
So was that something you had to sort of train your eye to do to kind of recognize some of these things, or was it something that was more or less natural to you?
I think it's intuitive, for sure. Yeah. I can't explain. But I also take so many photographs that I'll take like 600 or something and then maybe make 6 drawings from it, 6 paintings.
So another big theme I think that I see in your work is sort of the rise and decay of industry, so to speak, the wastefulness of it all, and how you're sort of capturing the end point of that journey, and how nature is starting to reclaim some of it. Is that part of what you're trying to build into the message, highlighting this wastefulness and maybe telling a story about that? Is it almost like a cautionary tale, or is that...
I mean, do you ever feel like you can make work and it can be like about 10 million things at once and you can't quite like nail down what you're doing? But that also is definitely part of it. And especially if you go to Detroit, you can't just talk about the waste though, because a lot of it was like unintended consequences from racism, or intended. I'm not really sure in the race riots. And so that's kind of a tragic part of the story and why Detroit looks the way it does. But also, I feel like the two are connected, that sort of like build these industries to benefit your wallet as long as they do so, and then you leave them behind, sort of like a capitalism sort of thing. Like there's massive buildings, they're huge, and they took so many, resources to make and so many people's labor to get them to run, and then you can just leave them. And like, yeah, but I don't necessarily think about industry too much because I feel like it could be quite depressing and maddening. But I do think about the nature. And I remember I had this moment, which I've been thinking about a lot lately when I was doing my last solo for Think Space. I forgot what it was called. Something abandoned. I don't know, but
Wild Abandoned?
Yeah, but I really liked that show. Like I've made solos where I got done and I was like, oh my God, this work is terrible. The title doesn't fit. I don't like the work. It doesn't feel like me. But that show I really liked, and I was proud of it. And I really love painting snow. I love painting winter landscapes. And I've noticed a change in the weather in Michigan. When I go home in the winter, there's not often snow anymore, And it's become so hard. It's becoming increasingly hard to like time a trip in the winter with actual snow. And so I kind of it just magically happened when I went home, and it was 2018. And so I just shot a bunch of photos. And then while I was making the work, I was thinking about how it's so hard to find a snowy winter in Michigan these days, in the past like maybe 10 years. And so like I would always think that people, I would imagine, sorry, I'm kind of a slow talker and thinker, but I would imagine like say in 100 years, say my work survived And I was lucky enough to have some work that hung around that people still looked at, which would be cool. But like right now, if I think about what people might remember about my work, people will be like, "Oh, you painted that building. I'm so glad you did because it's not here anymore. I love that building." Or I talk to a lot of graffiti artists because I like to ask permission before I do their work. And they'll be like, "Oh, I'm so glad you painted that tag of mine because it's not there anymore." So I always was like, well, maybe people want to remember the buildings or the graffiti because it's very popular right now. But then while making the show, I was like, well, what if in 100 years, what if people don't even remember the buildings? What if people don't even remember the graffiti? But what if they look at it, the paintings, and they're like, "Oh my God, do you see that snow? Do you remember when there was snow?" You know, like maybe there'll be a generation of people who never get to experience like seasons and snow. And so it kind of like sent me down this like rabbit hole of thinking of like, wow, what if right now, all of us artists who are working right now, in history books, we will be remembered as the last generation of artists who made work in and about like a healthy planet, you know, where we had like tons of food and we had seasons. And so. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you think there might still be humans in 100 years, that's a bonus. Because I don't know that I'm as confident about that.
Well, I just picked a number, but I was just imagining like, what if there's no snow someday? How sad would that be? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, among other things.
Doesn't environmentalism play into your messaging at all? And like, do you consider yourself an environmentalist?
In life, yes. I don't know if it always comes through in the work, but it's stuff I think about, you know? But like, yeah, what if, like I said, what if we're thinking about it in the distant future? You know, like maybe right now people will be like, "Oh, usually their reaction is, oh, that painting makes me cold. I hate snow." So.
So I do want to dive into your process a little bit because I'm curious to know kind of how that all comes together. And obviously these explorations into the cities are a big part of what goes into creating the work that you make. Are these usually like planned explorations and outings that you kind of take on your camera and you designate a day that, hey, I'm going to go do this? Or is it more of sort of an ad hoc thing where you just take your camera with you everywhere and you happen to notice a building and go explore it?
Yeah, you can't really, it changed a little bit when I moved to Portland because there's like no empty, real estate is so valuable. There's no empty buildings. So I bike commuted when I lived in Portland. I don't live in Portland right this minute. I'm kind of like in a transition, like trying to get to Canada. So I'm outside of Portland at the moment. I gave up my apartment thinking I was moving to Vancouver, and then visa stuff and COVID happened. So, but when I was living in Portland, I bike commuted everywhere. And so I don't have a fancy camera. I just have my phone. So I would just like stop all the time and take pictures. So it's a combination of both. A lot of it is I just have my phone on me. And then like when I go travel, I'll set aside time. Like if I go home all the time to Michigan, like maybe 3 times a year. And if I can like spare the time, I'll go visit friends in Detroit and take photos still. So it's like a combo.
How do you find all these places?
I'm just wandering around, either on foot or in my car. Sometimes people will tell me friends will tell me about them too.
You mentioned Portland wasn't quite the same as far as available spaces. Has that been a problem for you? Has it forced you to kind of go back home more often than you normally would have, or use Detroit as a subject more often because Portland doesn't really compare?
I think it's probably more changed what I paint. I do a lot more like exterior views and yeah, and I still do go back home and like pull out old material from time to time, but I think it's just changed my subject matter a tiny bit.
Okay. What other are there other like urban centers that you'd like to go to and visit and explore?
I did a big series of work on LA, where that's also the one I didn't like. So it just didn't feel like home to me, you know? And I felt like there was like that personal connection was missing. I was also going through a divorce at the time, so that might be why. I find we like embed our emotion, because painting and drawing is so like meditative that sometimes you're like, whatever you're going through, your emotions kind of get embedded in the pieces. And so they have a life of their own. And you're like, oh, don't even want to look at those. I went to Porto last fall, and it was like driving around Portugal. Man, that place was beautiful. I'd like to paint there more.
Doing all of these sort of explorations in empty spaces and abandoned spaces, have you ever found yourself in a dangerous situation?
Yeah, totally. But I think I don't know how, probably because I'm just like a white girl wandering around Detroit, I probably don't get the same treatment as other people, that live in Detroit. And so I'm quite fortunate in that way, which definitely is like says a lot about our country. But yeah, if I'm in a dangerous situation, oddly enough, I've been like, cops have pulled up. And what they do for me, because I'm a white girl, is they're like, oh, can we give you a ride home? You shouldn't be here, Yeah. But then I've also run into people out in buildings that, it was a little dangerous. I usually don't go by myself.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that would definitely be a smart thing, is to always come with somebody.
Yeah.
What about like security people? Have security people ever chased you off?
Yeah, one time when I was gathering images in LA, Birdman took me out. The guy who takes the photos at Think Space and does a lot of work for Juxtapose, I think. He took me out, and we were in the Hawthorne Mall, and turns out they were using it for filming. I think they were filming Westworld in there, and we like stumbled upon this like crazy looking set, and we got chased out and had to like jump over this wall, and like, I don't know. I was really thankful for my climbing skills. And then Birdman is just all around wily. So he just, that was really fun.
While you're on these outings, like what's your primary goal while you're in the moment? Like, are you taking as many shots as you can, or are you taking notes on those and trying to keep track of which ones might make for a good painting, etc.? Or does that all kind of come later?
That comes later, but I'm definitely being picky about. I've been in places and been like, none of this. I can't work with any of this. I don't know. There's just like a feeling you get where you're like, I know this isn't gonna turn out. But if I find a place I really like, I probably take like hundreds and hundreds of photos. Because a lot of times when you get back to the studio, you're not just using one photo. It's like a combo of a bunch of photos to recreate a scene.
And is being present in the moment like an important part of your process? Like what I mean is could you maybe work from somebody else's photos, or is you being there and it kind of experiencing the spirit of it all part of what goes into your paintings as well?
I think both. I would personally never, unless it was a commission by somebody, which I've done before, I will paint a picture if they really want it, but I don't ever make my own work from other people's photos. I don't feel good about that. I think the composition needs to be my own, and I do need to be there.
Do you think that makes that better, just kind of feeling the vibe in the room, so to speak?
I couldn't say. I'd have to do an experiment and try and paint one that doesn't. But I definitely don't have the same connection while I'm making it, Like memories come back. You remember like how cold it was, or how stinky it was, or beautiful, or peaceful, or the people you ran into, or the people you were with. Yeah. But I don't know if that actually shows in the work, because I've never like tried the opposite.
Once you've picked out, what photos that you like and want to move forward with, what's like the next step in that process? Do you normally sketch out compositions, or just go straight into painting?
If I'm like heavily editing the images, I'll do sketches, because a lot of times you just move so many things around that you want to see what it's going to look like. But then generally at that point, that's the boring stuff. That's where you sit in your studio for 10 hours a day and just, bust it out. It's hard work,
Sure. And so, your paintings are all in oil and drawings and mostly charcoal. What goes into your decision about which medium you'll go with for a particular piece?
Well, lately, I would say like in the past, ever since my last solo, so like not quite 2 years, I have not had a high demand for drawings. It's mostly paintings. Like the galleries all want paintings. People want paintings, which is funny because when I first started, my paintings struggled and my drawing was okay. And so I feel like maybe my paintings are getting better, which would be cool. So sometimes it's dictated by the gallery, but if I'm making a show of work that I want, I kind of, it's the image will tell you if it wants to be a drawing.
Do you have a personal favorite between the two? Like, do you have one that you just kind of feel like is more comfortable?
Drawing is more comfortable, yeah. It's less, you don't have to sit there forever. And I'm very tedious about color mixing, and it starts to feel a bit like a chore. And drawing is just it's so meditative and calming and fast.
Right on. Very cool. So let's talk about what you have coming up. And any shows. I guess you're working on your MFA, so that's got a lot of your attention. But do you have any shows coming up for 2021?
Not really. No, I know there'll be group shows. There always is. But I think I'm mostly trying to focus on the MFA. Yeah, usually like this time of year slows down a little bit after you like get all the holiday work out, the shows, and then people start hitting you up in the new year with their schedules and stuff. So between my MFA and the galleries I work with showing schedules for group shows, I know I'll be busy.
Okay, very cool. So where can people find you online?
My little baby Instagram account. It's just my name, I think, with the underscore between. And I have a website too. And I have, work on display at ThinkSpace usually, and A-Bend Gallery in Denver.
Awesome. So last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
Goodness.
I leave the hardest question for last.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of who I've been. I follow a lot of artists in like gallery spaces and curators on Instagram. What's really funny is I think a lot of people do that. It's a easy way to get access to information. And when I was in my interview at RISD, hopefully they don't listen to this, but they it was like this group of 9 people, and they were like very fancy, it was very intimidating. And the guy was like, "So where do you find new artists?" And I was like, Instagram. And he laughed at me like I was like some kind of barbarian, like, "Oh, how could you?" And he's like, "Well, who have you recently followed on Instagram that you like?" And it's this artist named Salomon Tour. He's a painter. Have you heard of him?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so anyways, I love his work. It's amazing. It's gorgeous. And so I mentioned that I had recently started following this artist, and he was like, "Oh, I've never heard of him." And the guy has a show at the Whitney. And I was like, "Oh my God." Yeah.
But I mean, like, what kind of answer did he expect in 2020? Like, how is he finding new art if not
right?
Instagram? Like,
new American paintings? I don't know. How did people do anything before the internet? I don't know.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I know social media is like got a lot of problems, but it's not like inherently bad. It's like the hand that wields it, right?
Right. No doubt. And there are a lot of concerning aspects of it, but yeah, you're right. I think it's how you use it more than anything else.
Yeah, because there's a lot of good on there. I don't know. Maybe you could reach out to that artist. I love his work. Very
cool. That's a great suggestion. So, Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. This has been a lot of fun.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, and sorry for all my technical difficulties. It's like
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Stephanie. I found it so interesting how Stephanie described that whole feeling that you get after your party's over and everybody's gone and you're cleaning up after the mess that everybody's made, and relating that feeling to how the earth will feel after humans are all gone. It's so spot on and visceral. I never really thought of it in those terms, but I really liked that comparison. And it was pretty cool to find out that this idea of Earth reclaiming these buildings of industry is part of what she built into her work. I also really love how she related the way that she felt going into these, abandoned factories with her experience venturing into the woods as a kid, and how those had a very similar appeal to her. How they have the same, stillness and quiet. I found that really interesting. So thanks again to Stephanie for joining me today. And thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. One big way you could help out if you're enjoying the show would be to review it on Apple Podcasts. And of course, just, sharing it with your friends. As always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairespodcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairespodcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.